Welcome. I'm Dr. Simon Whitton. This is Your Brain on Guitar, episode 3. Why passion feels the same, whatever you love. You know that story about Beethoven? People would compliment a performance and he'd say that the music he imagined was much better than what you just heard. Now that gap between the inner version and the outer version is where all of us live when we do something creative. Whether it's guitar, painting, cooking, writing. Here's an example, but I request you to think about something that fits in with your experience and tell me about it. Leave a comment, let's talk. A friend of mine, a friend of a friend, the drummer from a band called Cooler Shaker, Paul Winterhart, his name is. We were playing a gig together, a band I used to play in called Hornman. And he told me that he was opening for Neil Young, and after his set, he went up to congratulate him, but Neil, he just looked so dejected, so deflated, like he hated the show he'd just done. And when I saw Neil Young with my dad years later, Neil was very apologetic to the crowd. He told the crowd, some of what you've heard tonight, it kind of sucked, but we want you to know that we think you deserve the best. Now, what the hell is that? Now, Neil Young is obviously, he has trouble being satisfied with his performance. Now, in this episode of Your Brain on Guitar, I want to ask a simple question. Do different passions actually achieve the same thing for us? Is the fight the same? And what does that say about the way our brains turn imagination into reality? Let's start with that Beethoven idea I talked about in the previous episode. For creativity to even get off the ground, you have to treat the thing in your head as more real than what currently exists. Otherwise, why would you bother composing, painting, practicing at all? You play a phrase, you write a sentence, you bake a cake, and immediately you feel it's not quite what I imagined, maybe good enough. That little dissatisfaction is the engine, is the creative engine. It tells you there's something out there worth chasing. Now, philosophers of creativity, they discuss this in terms of patterns. So creativity isn't just making something new, it's taking an inner pattern, an emotional shape, a rhythmic idea, a story, and pushing the world to match it. That pattern can live in sound, in words, in images, or in movements. But at the human level, the move is the same. Make the imagined version your reference point, and then keep closing that gap. So for me, I feel this mission on the guitar. Take any of the songs I've uploaded to my channel recently, like Home, or Letting and Being, or Your Final Sound. I had some sense of the arc, the climax, how the picking should feel, long before there was a finished recording. Every time you sit down to play, you're comparing what your hands just did to that silent, ideal version and tweaking until it lines up a little better. So in my head, the climax of a song like Home, please check that out on the channel if you haven't, this is even bigger and more spacious than what my fingers could manage. But, that's the quest. You just keep trying to get there. Now, let's connect that to rhythm and the brain. So when we listen to or play music, our brains literally entrain to the beat. What I mean is neural activity, it starts to pulse in time with the rhythm to predict and update those predictions when the rhythm continues. So studies show that as rhythms gain complexity, more syncopation, more irregular spacing, those brain rhythms have to lock on more strongly, coordinate perception and movement. People often report more groove and desire to move when that entrainment succeeds and when there's a level of complexity and ease that offer the brain an activity. On the other end, very simple repetitive rhythms can be supported by more automatic machinery in the brain. That's why these things can be so relaxing. Our nervous system has what we call central pattern generators, spinal circuits that can drive basic repetitive movements such as walking or simple tapping. Think of a horse galloping. Once it initiates it, it doesn't have to think until it needs to stop. That means that there are patterns in your body that can keep going almost on autopilot. And patterns that demand full attention and fine control, these demand more engagement in the brain. My neuroscientific work on imagery, it fits nicely right here. So simple rhythms, these can ride on more automatic circuits. You don't need more structured imagination, you just let it run. Now complex rhythms, these demand entrainment. You need the brain to sync to the pattern that doesn't simply repeat. And that's where imagination and perception collaborate on every beat. So this feature, it lives in the hands and spine when we've played them enough, or that's how it feels anyway. The more we rehearse these complex syncopated or cross-picked patterns on the guitar, the more these things come naturally. So this kind of thing forces more attention and imagination to come online to keep it together. So again, we're back to the gap. The more complex the inner pattern, the more of yourself you have to recruit to match it. Whether that's a tricky, flat-picking figure, an intricate plot, an elaborate wood carving, your passion is basically you saying, I'm willing to bring more of my nervous system online to get closer to what this thing is that I'm imagining. So if you zoom out, this is why very different people, someone obsessed with fingerstyle guitar, someone obsessed with ceramics, someone obsessed with rock climbing, often sound strangely similar when they're talking about their craft. They all describe things like getting lost in the flow, feeling like time compresses or stretches, chasing a version in their head that always seems just out of reach. Our philosophy of art helps here. Different mediums, sound, image, language, movement, have different rules and materials, but they're all ways of structuring an audience's experience in space and time. In ordinary language, they're all ways of sharing a mental context, a specific feeling, atmosphere, or way of seeing the world. So when someone is deeply passionate about anything, they elevate an inner world, how things ought to sound, look, feel, above the default world. They pick a medium, guitar, canvas, code, pastry, as a bridge. They train the body until perception and action can entrain to that inner pattern. Your passion isn't about the object itself, it's about inhabiting that bridge. You're learning to trust an imagined version so that it reorganises your behaviour. And this is where the delusion angle appears. Imagination is powerful enough to blur into belief. The same systems that let us create rich fantasy can, in extreme cases, generate clinical delusions. In everyday creativity, we're playing right on that boundary. We allow ourselves to treat something unreal, the perfect solo, the ideal song, the flawless ceramic bowl, as if it's real enough to shape our lives, while still remembering it's a guiding fiction. Why does any of this matter? Are people who love different things all essentially achieving the same thing when they dive into their passion? From this angle, yes. They're all building bridges from imagination to perception using different materials. Guitar just happens to be our bridge in this series, which makes it a great way to watch this process play out. You as a player, you imagine a pattern, you move your fingers, and you hear exactly how close you got. But if your instrument were words, clay, dance, code, the underlying story, the need to treat the inner version as more real than the current world, and then patiently train yourself to entrain to it, that'd be the same. If this resonates with how you experience your own creativity on guitar or elsewhere, I'd love to hear your perspective. What's the pattern you've been treating as more real than the world so far? And how close do you feel you got to it by today? Drop me a comment. And thanks for subscribing. If you haven't already, please do that. I'm a fledgling channel. Every subscription really counts. And it'll really help me to shape future episodes if you comment. Now, I'd like to bring this to neuroscience again a little bit more. We've talked a bit about art. I want to bring a neuroscientist into this conversation because everything we've talked about, imagination, entrainment, passion across mediums, it also shows up in the scientific method. So when we picture science, we often imagine maybe something cold, mechanical, hypotheses, statistics, p-values. But if you listen to a scientist talk about their own process, they sound surprisingly like artists. Peter Medawar, a Nobel-winning biologist, he once wrote that every discovery begins as an imaginative preconception of what the truth might be. A brainwave, an inspired guess. In other words, even in science, you have to treat an inner version, an imagined explanation as more real than the current data for long enough to test it. If we didn't, we'd never form a hypothesis at all. Philosophers and neuroscientists, they describe this as a dance between imagination and discipline. Imagination gives you that leap. Maybe complex rhythms, as I would say, require full neural entrainment, while simple rhythms can ride on spinal circuits. Then the method, careful measurement, controls, statistics, these come into play to ask, is that actually true? If the evidence says no, you don't get to hold on to that inner version just because you're attached to it. You either refine it or you let it go. I've had to do that many times. Brain imaging studies on creativity even show this tension directly. A default network supports spontaneous idea generation, daydreaming, memory, your raw imaginative space. An executive network does focused evaluation and problem solving. A salience or understanding network, it helps to toggle between the two. Scientific creativity happens when these systems cooperate and you let the default network propose a pattern, and then you use executive control to test, refine, and sometimes reject. So whether you're writing a song, designing an experiment, or carving a sculpture, you're in the same situation. You fall in love with an inner pattern and treat it as temporarily more real than the world. I might be wrong there for sculptors, let me know. You build a bridge. I build a bridge through the guitar, data collection. Some might do this with clay, so you can test how close we can get. We accept that part of the process is letting reality talk back and being willing to change our minds when the outer world refuses to match our favourite inner version. If you're a player or a scientist or both, that's an oddly comforting thought. The courage to chase a pattern that only you can see and the humility to let experience shape it is the same human move, whether your tools are strings, equations, paints. And that to me is what Your Brain on Guitar is really about. Understanding how this brain, with all its rhythms, networks, and imaginative leaps, perhaps delusions, it uses whatever medium it can find to bring its inner world a little closer to the rest of us. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.